600 children ripped from their beds in the dead of night. A courtroom packed with rage, fear, and cameras rolling nationwide. And at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett staring down Donald Trump, calling him the most cruel and heartless leader America has ever seen. For 31 frozen seconds, the world watched him collapse into silence. If justice itself can be silenced, will we rise to defend it, or let it die? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The broadcast did not open with music, no polished graphics, no familiar comfort of anchors easing the blow. It opened with chaos. A shaky cell phone video fills the screen, blurry streetlights, the panicked voice of a child, the slam of a van door in the dark. Viewers across America feel their stomachs knot as agents in ice jackets herd rows of children into buses with curtains drawn shut. The timestamp on the footage blinks to 17 a.m. somewhere. A little boy screams for his mother. The sound is raw, unedited, and it rips through living rooms like shrapnel. The feed cuts to a stark drone shot. A line of buses snaking across the Texas desert, headlights carving scars into the black. Reporters whisper spill over the footage, half disbelief, half fury. Over 600 Guatemalan children. Taken in the night, the camera zooms in through a tinted bus window. A small face presses against the glass, eyes wide with terror. Her palm flattens against the pane as if she could reach the millions of Americans watching, begging them to notice, begging them to care. Then silence. No commentary, no explanation, just 30 seconds of unbearable quiet as the world stares at these faces. A single question flashes across the bottom of the screen in stark white letters. What kind of nation preys on the innocent? The scene slams into Washington, D.C. The Capitol dome looms under a gray morning sky, its columns less like symbols of democracy and more like sentinels watching a crime unfold. Crowds surge at the barricades, parents clutching photos of missing children, activists chanting "Protect the kids." Protest signs tremble in the wind, ink bleeding under sudden rain. Police radios crackle, the sound of a country on edge. And inside, under blinding lights and cameras rolling, a figure steps into the chamber. Jasmine Crockett. She does not arrive with bodyguards or bravado. She arrives with a thin folder of case files pressed to her chest, and the weight of 600 children pressing on her shoulders. Her face is fierce but haunted, eyes carrying both fury and sorrow. Every step she takes echoes off marble floors like a verdict waiting to be read. The nation sees not just a congresswoman, but a woman transformed into a weapon of truth. The camera lingers on her hand nails, digging into the folder's edge as if holding back the urge to tear it open and hurl the evidence at her enemy's face. For a fleeting second, the lens catches the tremor in her jaw, not fear, but the boiling rage of someone who has seen too much cruelty to stay silent. Viewers lean closer to their screens. They sense what's coming. They feel the fuse burning. The chair across the chamber sits empty, waiting for Donald Trump. Its presence is heavier than any man, as though the cruelty itself has already taken a seat. Jasmine lifts her head, her voice ready to split the silence. Only the heartless would do this to children. The words hang in the air like a blade drawn in the dark. The crowd outside roars, the chamber shifts, and millions at home clutch their breath. For the first time, America knows this will not be politics as usual. This will be war. And then she asks the question that no one can look away from. If justice itself was in danger, would you stand up, or would you stay silent? Backstage, the noise of the chamber is a low thunder behind thick oak doors. Jasmine Crockett sits at a narrow desk beneath a single light, her fingers trembling not from fear but from the fury cold inside her chest. Before her lies a folder, stuffed with affidavits, transcripts, and grainy photographs. At the very top is a hand-drawn picture in faded crayon, a house with no roof, stick figures with no smiles. It belongs to LG, the 10-year-old orphan girl whose name has been reduced to 2 letters to shield her from further cruelty. Jasmine stares at the sketch until the lines blur, until she feels a weight of every child's silence pressing against her ribs. She whispers to herself, almost like a prayer, "Not one more." The memory strikes hard. Trump at a rally, pounding his fists, grinning as he thundered, "We have the toughest immigration crackdown in history. Nobody is safe if they come here illegally." The crowd had erupted, flags waving, chants echoing through stadium walls. That voice, dripping with pride at the idea of tearing families apart, rings in Jasmine's ears now like a threat that never ends. She clenches her jaw, forcing herself back to the present, forcing herself to breathe. Tonight, she is not simply answering Trump. Tonight, she is carrying the cries of 600 children who cannot speak for themselves. An aide rushes in, pale, whispering updates. Buses are already rolling, engines idling on the tarmac, ICE agents moving with mechanical precision, boots striking pavement in rhythm with screaming parents banging on barricades. Jasmine closes her eyes for a moment, and in her mind, she sees it. A 7-year-old boy reaching through steel mesh for a mother's hand that never quite touches his. A teenage girl yanked from a phone call mid-sentence, her sob cut short by the click of a line gone dead. The images are so vivid they feel branded into her skin. She grips the folder tighter, as if it were the last shield between justice and oblivion. She rises, straightening her suit jacket, every movement deliberate, like a soldier preparing for battle. Her breath steadies into the rhythm of footsteps. She knows she will soon take down that long marble aisle. The aide tries to speak again, but Jasmine lifts her hand, silencing him. She does not need more numbers, more horrors. She carries enough already. What she needs is resolve. What she needs is to make the nation see what cruelty looks like when it has a face and a name. The heavy door creaks open. A gust of cold air from the chamber washes over her, carrying the murmur of reporters, the scrape of chairs, the electric anticipation of millions watching from their screens. And then there he is, Donald Trump. Already seated, already smirking, that familiar mask of arrogance stretching wider, his eyes lock on hers. It is not the smirk of confidence, but the smirk of a man who believes power is invincible, that children's tears are nothing but collateral. Jasmine steps into the chamber, her heels striking like gavel blows, her eyes never leaving his. The room stills, the cameras swing, and the tension coils tighter than a pulled trigger. Every file, every cry, every sleepless night has led to this moment. She does not blink, she does not break, and as the silence deepens into something unbearable, the audience knows the war is about to begin. The chamber is a furnace of light and anticipation, every camera fixed, every microphone leaning forward. Like a predator waiting for its prey, Jasmine Crockett does not shuffle papers or clear her throat. She looks directly at the panel, her voice slicing through the silence. Only the heartless would do this to children. The words crash like glass on marble. A collective gasp surges across the room. Reporters drop pens, aides freeze mid-step. Even the judge tilts forward in his chair as if the air itself has shifted. The accusation is naked, sharp, and irreversible. Donald Trump slams his palm against the desk, the sound ricocheting off the chamber walls. His face flushes red, jaw tight, the familiar sneer curling into something feral. "I'm protecting America," he bellows, spittle catching the light. "I'm saving this country from invaders." His words echo, but they don't land as triumph, they land as violence. The gallery stirs uneasily, the truth of his fury laid bare for all to see. From the side row, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaps up like a guard dog unleashed. "You're a liar, Crockett, a disgrace." Nothing but a radical puppet. Her voice cracks with desperation, shrill enough to rattle the microphones. But before she can continue, a wave of boos drowns her out. Audience members in the gallery rise to their feet, fingers pointed, voices united in contempt. The chant begins low and builds into a roar that rattles the very columns. "Shame! Shame! Shame!" Trump pounds the desk again, shouting over the thunder, but the cameras catch what words cannot hide. His smirk faltering, his eyes darting, the mask of control slipping. Jasmine does not flinch, she doesn't even look at him. She raises a single sheet of paper, a court notice, with hearings erased in black ink, and holds it high like a torch. "This is not protection," she declares, her voice steady and merciless. "This is erasure. You erase their futures, you erase their voices. And now you dare call it justice." The chamber explodes again, half in applause, half in outrage. Security tightens their grip on the railings as the clash threatens to spiral. Greene shouts incoherently. Trump mutters to his lawyers. The audience chants louder, and in the eye of the storm, Jasmine stands immovable, her figure framed against the flood of noise like a silhouette carved in fire. The cameras pan across the crowd, mothers clutching photos, veterans shaking their heads, students wiping tears they didn't expect to shed. America is watching, not as spectators, but as witnesses, pulled into a story they cannot turn away from. Jasmine leans forward, her voice cutting through the cacophony with surgical precision. This isn't about left or right, it's about right or wrong, and I will not let cruelty hide behind patriotism. The silence that follows is heavier than any shout, a silence that demands to be answered. And as millions lean closer to their screens, breath caught in their throats, the question trembles in the air like a fuse waiting for fire. When the truth is shouted into the darkness, who dares listen? Trump leans back in his chair, lips curling into a smirk sharpened for television. He raises a hand for silence, his voice booming with the self-assured venom of a man who has wielded crowds like weapons. This woman, he growls, stabbing a finger toward Jasmine, is nothing but a puppet of the radical left-reading lines written for her by socialists who hate America. Gasps ripple through the chamber, cameras flash like gunfire, and his words hang heavy with the stench of accusation. Beside him, Stephen Miller leans in, his pale lips brushing Trump's ear with whispered strategy. The cameras can't catch the words, but the effect is immediate. Trump's eyes narrow, and his tone hardens like steel. They don't tell you the truth. These so-called children, these innocents, are criminals in the making. Gang members, drug runners, future threats to every American family. A chorus of nods spreads along the GOP bench, their rehearsed lines ready, the machinery of spin roaring to life. One senator chimes in, "We're not talking about toddlers, we're talking about time bombs." Another adds, "Protecting them means endangering us." The audience shifts uneasily, whispers colliding with outrage. Jasmine doesn't wait her turn. She surges forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. 7-year-olds. Criminals, you've lost your mind. The chamber freezes. Her words slice through the air with such force that even the stenographer's fingers hesitate over the keys. Shock waves ripple outward. Mothers in the gallery clutch their mouths. Reporters lock eyes as if confirming they all heard the same impossible claim. Trump stiffens, his smirk faltering, but Jasmine doesn't relent. She plants her hands on the table, leaning forward until the microphones tremble at the edge of her fury. A child clutching a stuffed rabbit is not MS-13. A girl orphaned, speaking a language you can't even pronounce, is not your enemy. The only threat in this room is the cruelty you're trying to pass off as patriotism. The audience erupts, half in thunderous applause, half in seething boos. Trump slams the desk again, his voice cracking under the weight of his anger. "I'm defending America." But the words sound weaker this time, drowned beneath the roar of chants swelling from the gallery. "Shame, shame, shame." Jasmine straightens, her chest rising and falling with the gravity of the moment. Her eyes lock on Trump's, unblinking, and afraid. The room has become a battlefield of sound cheers, jeers, gasps, but at its center there is only silence, the silence of one man being stripped of his shield of lies. And then Jasmine delivers the final blow of the exchange, her voice steady as stone. "History will not remember you as a protector, Mr. Trump. It will remember you as the man who called children criminals to justify his own cruelty." The chamber quakes with reaction, but her words cut deeper than any chant. And as the cameras close in on Trump's face, caught between fury and fear, the question ignites across the nation like fire racing across dry fields. If even children can be branded enemies, who among us will ever be safe? Outside the chamber, America fractures in real time. CNN's feed splits the screen into 3 jagged windows. On the left, Trump pounding the desk, veins bulging. In the middle, Jasmine standing unshaken, her face lit like a flame against marble. On the right, live shots from the streets outside, supporters waving flags, chanting "Deport them all." While police form barricades to hold back the surge, every network seizes the spectacle. Fox News frames it as a battle of law and order versus chaos. Their chyron blaring, "Trump defends America." MSNBC counters with stark captions, "Crockett, children are not criminals." Viewers watch the dueling narratives as though the country itself is on trial. In shelters across Texas and Arizona, immigrant families cluster around battered televisions, volume turned high despite the crackle of poor reception. Mothers weep hopefully, clutching photographs of sons and daughters who were almost loaded onto planes hours before. A little boy, no older than 8, asks in Spanish if Jasmine can stop the buses forever. No one has an answer. Their silence is broken only by Jasmine's voice echoing through the static, steady, commanding, impossible to ignore. The streets outside Capitol Hill are another war zone. Trump's base, clad in red caps, shout slurs into megaphones, waving posters with slogans scrawled in black ink. America first, send them home. Fireworks crack in daylight, smoke clouding the sky, while counter-protesters hoist signs dripping with paint and tears. Protect the children. Not in our name. The two sides clash at the barricades, chants colliding like waves, one side screaming for deportation, the other for compassion. Police sirens wail, batons raise, and cameras capture every second. Online, the battle multiplies. Hashtags trend at lightning speed. Hashtag protect the children rockets to number 1 within minutes, countered by hashtag send them home, flooding feeds with vitriol. Clips of Jasmine's fiery rebuke, 7-year-olds, criminals, you've lost your mind, are shared millions of times before the hearing even concludes. TikTok stitches, Twitter threads, Facebook leds America scrolls and argues, each side convinced history is unfolding in their favor. The algorithm does not care, it feeds on outrage, pouring gasoline onto a nation already burning. Yet at the epicenter, Jasmine stands untouched by the noise. Her voice cuts through the chaos, calm but unyielding, as if she knows every camera is not just a lens but a window into the soul of America. She looks past Trump's glare, past Green's rants, and speaks to the mothers watching in shelters, to the children pressing their faces against bus windows, to the students chanting in the streets. Her words are not just argument, they are lifelines thrown into a storm. The chamber holds its breath, the networks frame their headlines, the nation waits, and Jasmine, unwavering, asks with the weight of 600 children behind her, if the most powerful country on earth cannot protect its weakest, then what does our flag truly stand for? Trump leans into the microphone, his face flushed crimson under the floodlights, his voice dripping with venom sharpened for humiliation. You are unqualified, you are angry, you are dangerous. Each word lands like a gavel strike, calculated to strip Jasmine not only of credibility, but of her humanity. His allies pound their desks in rhythm, the chamber trembling with the orchestrated echo of partisan cruelty. Cameras zoom in on Jasmine, waiting for her to falter, for her to lower her eyes, for her to stumble beneath the weight of a president's wrath. But she does not move. Her hands rest firmly on the table, her gaze locked on Trump with a stillness more powerful than shouting. When she finally speaks, her voice is clear, ringing against marble like steel against stone. The only danger here is a president without compassion. The words hang, sharp as glass, slicing through the chamber's suffocating nose. The effect is instantaneous. A roar detonates across the room, applause, jeers, chants, all colliding in a chaos so deafening the judge's gavel nearly disappears beneath it. Supporters rise to their feet, clapping until their palms sting, while Trump's loyalists sneer, their mouths twisting into insults drowned by the tide of approval. Even the reporters, bound by neutrality, exchange glances heavy with awe. Jasmine has turned the insult inside out, exposing Trump's attack not as dominance, but as desperation. Trump slams the desk again, his knuckles white, but this time the sound rings hollow. The cameras catch at the flicker of unease in his eyes, the faltering rhythm of a man who has always relied on power to silence dissent. Miller whispers frantically at his side. Green screeches across the aisle, but their noise is background static now, irrelevant against the clarity of Jasmine's defiance. She rises to her feet, voice cutting through the storm with surgical precision. You call me unqualified, but I stand here armed with the truth. You call me angry, but anger in the face of injustice is not weakness, it is duty. And you call me dangerous. The only thing I endanger is your ability to hide cruelty behind the flag of this nation. The chamber erupts again, louder, wilder, unstoppable. In the gallery, mothers clutching photographs of their children sob opally, their tears transformed into fuel. Students chant from the rafters. Protesters outside, watching on giant screens, echo her words in unison, their voices ricocheting across the barricades. For a moment, the Capitol itself feels less like a building and more like a battlefield. History unfolding in real time with no script, no safety net, no way back. Jasmine leans forward, her words now directed not at Trump but at every camera, every screen, every American watching. So let me ask you, Mr. Trump, and let me ask this nation, when power mocks justice, when cruelty wears a crown, can one voice still shake the world? The clock on Jasmine's phone blinked 12:47 a.m. when the first whisper reached her desk, a tip from an aide buried deep inside DHS. The message was blunt, panicked, and damning. ICE wasn't just executing deportations, they were testing something new, something they called a pilot program with Guatemala. Flights scheduled at 2 a.m., no parental contact, no warning to attorneys, no chance for the children to speak before a judge. 600 kids treated not as human beings, but as test subjects in an experiment of cruelty. Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't law enforcement. This was a kidnapping sanctioned by government authority. She grabbed her coat and raced through the rain-slicked streets of Washington to a small office still glowing with fluorescent light. Efrain Olivares was already there, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless nights. On the table between them, stacks of affidavits, frantic text messages from lawyers in Texas and Arizona, photos of children still in sheltered beds hours before ICE vans arrived. Jasmine slammed the latest intel down. They're moving them now. Flights in less than an hour. Efrain rubbed his temples, then snapped into action. We have to file emergency injunction. Tonight, now. The room became a war room. Printers screamed, laptops hissed, phones vibrated without pause. Every second was borrowed time, one call after another. Jasmine punching numbers with trembling fingers, attorneys in shelters whispering updates over the cries of children being lined up outside. They're cutting bracelets off kids. They're wiping names from the system. This is happening. Efrain's voice was steady but ragged. If we don't stop this before the first wheels lift off the ground, dozens will vanish into a country they don't even remember. 1:26 a.m. Jasmine dialed the emergency line for the federal court. The phone rang once, twice, and then a judge's gravelly voice broke through the static. Why are you calling me at this hour? Jasmine did not hesitate. She unleashed the storm statutes, constitutional violations, the names of children erased from calendars, the photographs of orphans, the evidence of a government operating like smugglers in the dark. Silence followed. The judge finally exhaled. Send me the filings. I'll review immediately. Efrain fired the documents across encrypted lines, fingers flying with the urgency of a man sprinting toward a burning building. Outside, ICE buses idled on a runway, their engines growling against the night. Children clutched each other, some in tears, some too numb to cry. Agents barked orders, the pilots checked their watches. Jasmine pressed the phone tighter to her ear, every tick of the clock a dagger. 1:57 a.m. No ruling yet. 1:58, the first bus door clanged open. A little boy stumbled forward, blinking at the floodlights, and then to a 1 a.m. Jasmine's phone lit up. A voice on the other end. Temporary restraining order granted. Halt all removals, effective immediately. Relief collided with rage. Because even in victory, Jasmine knew the truth. Some children were already on planes, already airborne. She closed her eyes, her fists slamming the table. This was not the end. This was the beginning of a darker revelation. The nation was asleep, but Jasmine whispered to the storm outside. If they dare steal children in the dead of night, what won't they do in the light of day? The documents told one story, but the children told another. Case files that once held court dates now appeared blank, hearings erased with the cold efficiency of a delete key. Lawyers discovered schedules vanished overnight, names struck from rosters as if these children had never existed. Every red circle on a calendar meant a chance to be her, to plead for safety, to prove their right to stay. Now those circles were gone, replaced by silence and uncertainty. In detention shelters, fear spread like smoke. An 8-year-old boy clutched his blanket, whispering to Jasmine in Spanish, barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights. Will they take me too? The question was not a plea, but a prophecy, and Jasmine felt it sink into her bones. She knelt, steadying her voice though her throat ached with grief. Not if I can stop them, she told him. The boy's wide eyes searched her face for something stronger than words, something unbreakable. She forced a smile, though her chest was on fire, and pressed her hand gently over his. I won't let you down. Everywhere she turned, new stories unfolded like wounds. A girl of 12 who had practiced her testimony for weeks only to find her hearing disappeared overnight. A teenager clutching letters from classmates, begging not to be sent back to a place where her father was murdered. A toddler with no guardian at all, passed from one stranger's arms to another as if she were luggage. Jasmine carried their voices, their trembling questions, their unanswered prayers, inside her like a rising storm. The weight of it threatened to crush her, yet it fueled her fury with every step she took toward the chamber. Outside, the storm of public outrage had swelled into a movement. Protesters filled the streets under floodlights, voices hoarse, unyielding, signs raised high despite the rain-soaking cardboard and ink. "Kids are not criminals," the chant thundered, over and over, fists pumping against the barricades as if sheer force of will could stop the buses. A woman wrapped in the American flag screamed, until her voice cracked, "This is not who we are." Reporters struggled to capture the chaos, lenses fogging, microphones drowned in a sea of defiance. The clash of chants, the wail of sirens, the pounding of drums, it all merged into a single heartbeat echoing across the nation. Jasmine stood at the edge of the shelter window, watching the protests on a small TV, her reflection superimposed over the images of screaming crowds. The children huddled around her, their eyes wide, not fully understanding the slogans, but feeling the raw electricity of people fighting for them. For a moment, hope flickered in their faces, fragile but real. Jasmine placed her hand against the glass as if to reach through it, to join the thousands outside. Her voice was quiet, meant only for the children beside her but carried by the conviction of someone who refused to yield. "They want you invisible," she said, "but America is seeing you now." The room stilled, the chant from the TV still thundering, and Jasmine's eyes narrowed with fire. Because in that moment, she knew the fight had already leapt beyond the courtroom. It had become a battle for the nation's soul. And if America was willing to forget its children, what else was it willing to destroy? The digital clock on the courthouse wall glowed for 30 a.m. when the ruling finally came down. A federal judge, roused from sleep and confronted with affidavits spilling horror in black ink, signed the emergency block with a hand that trembled from exhaustion, burned with conscience. The order was clear, urgent, absolute. All deportations of Guatemalan children halted immediately. Phones lit up across Washington, staffers shouting into headsets, lawyers slumping in their chairs with relief, but the victory came too late. Somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, engines were already roaring, and children were already buckled into seats, their small faces pressed against oval windows streaked with condensation. The law had caught up with cruelty, but cruelty had a head start. Jasmine heard the news in the shelter hallway, her back against a wall plastered with faded posters of cartoon animals meant to comfort children who could no longer sleep. Relief should have flooded her veins. Instead, fury roared through her like fire in dry timber. "This is beyond cruelty," she spat, her voice breaking the quiet. "This is madness." She slammed her fist against the cinder-block wall, startling aides who had never seen her mask slip so completely. She thought of LG, the little girl with the crayon drawing, thought of the boy who whispered, "Will they take me too?" and knew some of them were already in the sky, already stolen by a government that had chosen darkness over decency. Reporters raced to confirm the ruling, headlines firing across screens, "Court blocks child deportations" on CNN. Radical judges interfere with law and order on Fox. Then, at 4:41 a.m., Trump unleashed his rage in 280 characters. "Radical judges ruin America. Weak on crime, weak on borders, total disgrace." Within seconds, his words were everywhere, scrolled across Chiron bars, screenshot, retweeted, amplified into millions of homes. Supporters outside the Capitol cheered the tweet like scripture, chanting, "Send them back," louder than ever, while protesters answered with a wall of defiant voices, "Kids are not criminals." The streets became a duel of echoes, democracy reduced to a battlefield of throats and fists. Inside the shelter, Jasmine pressed her forehead against the cool wall, breathing hard, eyes burning. Around her, children stirred, awakened not by her voice but by the noise of helicopters circling overhead. Their fear was wordless, but it filled the room like smoke. She crouched, gathering them close, her anger forced into resolve. "The order is here," she whispered to them, her voice steadier than her heart. "They cannot take you now." But even as she said it, she knew some already had been taken, their names erased, their stories cut mid-sentence. The victory was real but fractured, a shield raised too late to stop the first wound. The cameras caught Jasmine leaving the shelter as dawn bled into the horizon, her face lit in equal parts by sunrise and fury. She looked not at the reporters, but into the lens itself, speaking to the nation that had witnessed the night's horror unfold. Her words cut deeper than law, sharper than protest. If justice comes at dawn, what horrors still hide in the night? The chamber was a pressure cooker, the air thick with fury, the nation balanced on a knife's edge. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat, the folder of erased hearings clutched in one hand, her other hand trembling with a fire she no longer cared to hide. She walked the length of the aisle with the measured steps of someone walking toward a battlefield. The cameras tracked every second, zooming in as her shadow stretched across the polished floor until it collided with the desk where Donald Trump sat, lips curled in that familiar smirk of arrogance. She stopped, raised her finger, and aimed it at him like a loaded weapon. Her voice thundered through the chamber, unflinching and merciless. "You are a cruel, heartless man, a madman with no soul." The words detonated. The gallery gasped, reporters' pens froze mid-stroke, and even the judge leaned forward as if struck by a physical blow. Trump's grin faltered, the smirk collapsing under the weight of a truth he could not laugh away. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. For the first time in years, the man who thrived on chaos and dominance was cornered, his silence louder than any insult he had ever hurled. Seconds ticked like thunderclaps. 1, 2, 5. The camera held on Trump's face as color drained and returned in waves. He shifted in his chair, fingers drumming nervously against the desk, eyes darting for escape routes that did not exist. The microphones picked up nothing but the sound of his breath, shallow, uneven, human. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, hands pressed to mouths, hearts pounding. By the 10th second, hashtags exploded across social media. Hashtag 31 seconds, hashtag Trump silenced, hashtag Crockett confronts spreading like wildfire as millions recorded the rarest of sights, Trump, speechless. Jasmine did not flinch, did not soften. She stood like a statue carved from rage and resolve, her fingers still leveled at him, her eyes unblinking. Every child whose hearing had been erased, every parent who had screamed through steel fences, every orphan nearly shipped into oblivion, they were all in her voice, all in her stance. She whispered into the silence, low but captured by every mic, "This is who you are." The chamber shuddered with gasps again, the sound of truth piercing deeper than any headline. 31 seconds of silence stretched into eternity, and when the count finally ended, America understood the scale of the moment. The man who called children criminals had been reduced to nothing more than a man, stripped of power by a single accusation, exposed before the world. Jasmine lowered her hand, her voice steady as steel as she delivered the final cut. "If the most powerful man in America cannot answer for his cruelty, then it falls on us to answer for him." And with those words, she turned not to Trump, but to the cameras, daring the nation itself to respond. The silence was still hanging in the air, raw and heavy, when Marjorie Taylor Greene snapped. She shot to her feet like a fuse catching fire, her voice shrieking across the chamber, "You're trash, Crockett." Nothing but trash. The insult tore through the microphones with a venom that made even her own allies wince. The sound echoed for a heartbeat before it was swallowed whole by something louder, something unstoppable. From the gallery to the rafters, a chant ignited, voices layering into a thunder that shook the marble. "Shame, shame, shame." Greene's face twisted as she tried to scream over it, but the crowd drowned her like a tidal wave crashing over a single, desperate figure. Democrats surged to Jasmine's side, slamming their palms on desks, raising their voices in solidarity. One congresswoman shouted, "She speaks for America." Another bellowed, "Children are not bargaining chips." The chamber's left side rose in unison, a wall of bodies shielding Jasmine from the venom hurled across the aisle. For once, party lines felt less like politics and more like a battle formation. They rallied not just around her, but around the truth she had unleashed, the truth no one could silence now. Up in the gallery, the emotional dam broke. Immigrant mothers who had risked everything to attend this hearing clutched photographs of their children and cried openly, their tears streaming under the hot lights. One woman, her voice trembling but strong, shouted through sobs, "Thank you, thank you." The words pierced the chaos, raw gratitude cutting through chants and insults alike. Jasmine looked up, her eyes meeting theirs, and in that split second the chamber transformed. It was no longer marble and microphones, it was the heartbeat of every family whose pain had been ignored, amplified now in front of the nation. Greene raged, pounding the desk with her fists, her shrieks devolving into static no one cared to hear. Trump glared, fists clenched, his jaw grinding, but his silence lingered, heavy and damning. Meanwhile, the cameras locked on Jasmine, her figure steady amid the storm, her face resolute, her presence expanding until she was no longer just a congresswoman at a witness table. She was a symbol, a champion, a flame no insult could extinguish. The chants thundered louder, reporters scribbled furiously, and millions at home leaned forward as if the glass of their screens could shatter under the weight of it all. Jasmine stood taller, her voice rising above the roar, aimed not at Green, not at Trump, but at the soul of the nation. You can scream at me. You can smear my name, but you will never erase the truth. America belongs to its people, not to cruelty. The chamber erupted once more, this time not in chaos, but in a surge of applause that felt like an earthquake. And as Jasmine lowered her gaze, the cameras captured the transformation the moment she stopped being just a voice in Congress and became something larger, the vessel of a fight that no chamber could contain. The question that followed was no longer whether she could stand against her enemies, but whether the country itself was brave enough to stand with her. Trump's face flushed deep crimson as the chants echoed through the chamber, his patience fractured like glass under a hammer. He shoved back his chair, the scrape of metal against marble slicing through the uproar, and lurched to his feet. His hands curled into fists, his mouth twisted into a snarl, and for a moment it seemed he would walk out, abandoning the fight he could no longer control. Cameras swung wildly to catch the spectacle, the nation watching a former president reduced to retreat. But before his first step cleared the desk, a thunderous crack split the air. The judge's gavel slammed down with the force of a rifle shot. "You will sit," his voice thundered, carrying an authority that silenced even the chaos outside the chamber doors. "You will face these accusations." The words were not a request but a command, etched into the record, binding Trump in chains stronger than steel. Gasps rippled through the room. This was no longer just a hearing, this was judgment. Trump froze, his eyes darting, his arrogance unraveling in real time. He tried to sneer, but the mask sagged. For the first time, the smirk that had been his armor failed him. He collapsed back into the chair, not out of choice but out of defeat, a man caged by the very system he once thought he owned. The silence that followed was suffocating, every heartbeat amplified, every breath caught in anticipation of what would come next. Jasmine did not hesitate. She stood, her posture towering, her gaze burning into him with the weight of 600 stolen childhoods. Her voice was steady, sharp enough to cut through the marrow of history itself. "Mr. Trump," she said, each syllable a hammer, "America will remember your cruelty." The line landed like a verdict, not just against the man before her but against every policy, every midnight raid, every child ripped from their bed in the name of power. The chamber convulsed with sound, cheers erupting from one side, boos exploding from the other, reporters' keyboards clattering like gunfire to capture the moment. Above it all, immigrant mothers wept, not just in sorrow, but in vindication, as though Jasmine's words had reached across walls and oceans to finally speak the truth their children could not. Trump sat rigid, lips pressed thin, eyes burning with rage he could not release, chained by the gavel, silenced by a single woman's defiance. The camera zoomed tight on Jasmine's face, capturing the unshakable resolve etched into her expression. She was no longer speaking only to Trump, no longer speaking only to the chamber. She was speaking to the nation, to the world, to the future itself. Her words were not merely condemnation, they were prophecy. And as the lights glared hotter, as the crowd's roar rose higher, the question pulsed like a drumbeat in every mind. When tyrants are cornered, do they fight or do they collapse? New York woke first. By dawn, tens of thousands had already poured into Times Square, fists raised, banners unfurling like battle standards. The words screamed from cardboard and fabric, "Protect the children, not in our name." Their edges soaked by a cold drizzle that did nothing to extinguish the fury. Drums pounded in rhythm with chants, the streets trembling as marchers surged past neon billboards now broadcasting live footage of Jasmine's confrontation. The city's heart, usually pulsing with commerce, now throbbed with outrage. Taxi horns blended with megaphones, and police sirens wailed as officers struggled to contain a tide too strong to stop. By midday, Los Angeles caught fire. Protesters flooded downtown, a sea of humanity spilling into freeways, halting traffic for miles. From the steps of City Hall to the gates of detention centers, voices rose in defiance, echoing off glass skyscrapers like war cries. Immigrant families marched at the front, children perched on shoulders, holding signs scrawled in crayon, "We are not criminals." Behind them came teachers, nurses, veterans, ordinary Americans who could no longer remain silent. Helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the clash live as counter-protesters lined the sidewalks, their red caps bobbing in unison as they roared "Build the Wall." The two chants collided in the air, a brutal duet of rage and resistance. Chicago roared last but loudest. Grant Park became a crucible of conflict where thousands gathered beneath storm-gray skies, their chants echoing against the skyline. "Protect the children," they screamed, pounding fists against barricades, the sound reverberating like cannon fire. Across from them, counter-protesters brandished American flags like weapons, screaming "Send them back." With faces contorted in fury, to divide was no longer metaphorical. It was physical, visible in the line of riot police standing shoulder to shoulder between two Americas staring each other down. Bottles flew, smoke bombs hissed, and the night air thickened with the taste of confrontation. News cameras captured it all, split screens on every network, Jasmine's defiance inside the Capitol mirrored by streets ablaze with protest. CNN framed it as a nation's conscience awakening. Fox declared it chaos engineered by radicals. MSNBC broadcast the voices of immigrant mothers live from the front lines. Social media turned every street corner into a battlefield of clips, streams, and hashtags, amplifying the chaos until it drowned out everything else. Yet amid the screaming and the flashing lights, something deeper emerged. In the chaos, in the rage, in the bitter divide, one truth stood undeniable. America was being forced to choose, families on one side clutching photographs of missing children, fists shaking in desperation. Hardliners on the other clutching flags, faces twisted with fear and defiance. Between them, a police line trembling under the weight of history. And as night fell, smoke rising from streets coast to coast, the question thundered louder than any chant, louder than any siren. If a nation cannot agree on protecting its children, can it agree on anything at all? The morning after the confrontation, America woke not to coffee and headlines, but to a battlefield of narratives. Every screen, every feed, every station blared Jasmine Crockett's name. On CNN, the banner stretched across the bottom in red. Crockett crushed Trump in historic clash. Anchors replayed the 31 seconds of Trump's stunned silence in a loop, each time marveling that the man who never shut up had finally been stripped of words. MSNBC cut together montages of Jasmine pointing her finger like a blade, immigrant mothers in the gallery crying "thank you," and the eruption of chants that shook the chamber walls. They called it a turning point, the moment cruelty met its reckoning. But on Fox News, the spin was instant and vicious. The chyron snarled, "Radical left versus America first." Commentators leaned forward with fire in their eyes, painting Jasmine not as a defender of children, but as a grandstanding puppet of the socialist mob. They replayed her words, "You are a cruel, heartless man," but stripped them of context, presenting them as an attack on the presidency rather than a defense of the voiceless. Within minutes, callers flooded the lines, half cheering Trump as a patriot betrayed by activist judges, half warning that the left had found its new star. On social media, however, the verdict was already sealed. Clips of Jasmine's confrontation racked up numbers at the speed of a breaking dam. 50 million views in under 24 hours, captions screaming across TikTok. 31 seconds of silence. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag Trump silenced. Hashtag Crockett vs. cruelty. Hashtag protect the children. Young activists posted reaction videos with tears in their eyes, while veterans of past fights called it the most courageous moment on the House floor in a generation. Even late-night hosts chimed in, replaying Jasmine's line, "The only danger here is a president without compassion," to standing ovations from their studio audiences. Everywhere, the images repeated. Jasmine's steady gaze, Trump's slack-jawed silence, Green's sputtering outrage drowned in chants of shame, shame, shame. The repetition turned the moment into something larger than politics. It became myth, a story America told itself in real time, each retelling sharpening the divide between those who saw a savior and those who saw a threat. By evening, Jasmine Crockett's name trended above celebrity scandals, sports scores, and even foreign wars. To millions, she was no longer just a congresswoman. She was courage incarnate, a warrior who had walked into the lion's den and forced the beast to retreat. Her inbox overflowed with messages from across the country, teachers, veterans, parents, pastors, each one saying the same thing in different words. "You gave us a voice." That as the storm of praise and condemnation raged, one truth rose above the noise. Jasmine's image, burned into the nation's memory overnight, was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every child whose name had been erased from a calendar, every parent who had been silenced at a fence. She was now their symbol, their champion, their fire. And yet, as America split screens, shared clips, and chose sides, a darker question lingered beneath the frenzy, a question no headline dared ask out loud. What happens when a single voice becomes too powerful for a nation already tearing itself apart? Long after the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds outside had thinned into scattered echoes, Jasmine sat alone in her office, the only light a desk lamp burning against the dark. Her jacket lay crumpled on the couch, her hands still stained with ink from emergency filings. The silence was deafening, a contrast to the storm she had just walked through. On the desk lay the folder again, its edges frayed from her grip, the top page a child's crayon drawing of a house without a roof. She stared at it until her eyes blurred, and the memory of the night returned in pieces: the roar of chants, Trump's silence, the judge's gavel, the flood of thank yous from desperate mothers. But now came the weight, the tears of the children she had met, their voices still trembling in her ears. The boy who whispered, "Will they take me too?" The girl who practiced her testimony for weeks only to have her court date erased. Jasmine pressed her palms into her eyes, fighting back terror she had refused to show in public. Every face, every story, haunted her like ghosts in the room. She had won a moment, yes, but was it enough to topple a machine built to crush the powerless in silence? Her phone buzzed relentlessly, messages of praise, of threats, of pleas for help, but she let it ring. Alone in the stillness, she asked herself the question gnawing at her soul. Is one battle enough to change a system built on cruelty? Could a single voice, even amplified to millions, bend the weight of a country addicted to fear, division, and the demonization of the innocent? She had shouted into the darkness and made the world listen once. But would the darkness simply return when the cameras turned away? She rose and walked to the window. Outside, Washington slept uneasily, its monuments glowing like ghosts under floodlights. In the distance, faint chants still drifted, protesters refusing to go home, their voices ragged but unyielding. Protect the children. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting the sound anchor her. Maybe she was not as alone as she felt. Maybe the fight was not hers alone to carry. Yet she also knew power never surrendered easily, and those who thrived on cruelty were already plotting their counterattack. The lamp flickered, her reflection in the glass fractured and strange, half warrior, half woman, exhausted by a war with no finish line. She touched the glass, her voice barely above a whisper, but steeled with conviction. They want these kids forgotten. I won't let that happen. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to cry, the tears not of defeat, but of a promise too heavy for words alone. And as she turned away from the window, her shadow stretching long across the empty room, the thought pressed into her chest like fire. Can a single warrior bend the arc of justice for a nation, or will the nation break her first? The courtroom was suffocating in its silence, every bench filled, every camera fixed, the air thick with anticipation of a reckoning. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp as thunder, and his command shattered the tension. The government will return every child already taken. Immediately, the words reverberated across the chamber, and for a breathless moment, even the hum of lights above seemed to falter. Trump's lawyers erupted, scrambling to their feet, their voices laced with panic disguised as authority. Your Honor, the President holds executive authority in matters of national security. His power cannot be second-guessed. These removals fall under his discretion, and interfering is a violation of separation of powers. Their words tumbled out like a wall of excuses, meant to shield cruelty behind the armor of legality. But the judge's expression did not move. He leaned forward, eyes piercing, waiting for someone to speak against the absurdity of justifying the theft of children as authority. That someone was Jasmine. She rose slowly, every eye turning to her, every camera lens tightening, her voice carrying with a fire that cut through the nose like steel on stone. Authority without morality is tyranny, she declared, her words echoing louder than any lawyer's protest. The gallery gasped, then roared in approval, the sound of applause breaking the rigid decorum of the court. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the line destined for headlines, destined to become a rallying cry. Trump's counsel tried to interrupt, sputtering about precedent and executive privilege, but Jasmine raised her voice again, unyielding. We are not talking about policy. We are talking about children. You can dress it up in the language of power, but you cannot disguise it as justice. This is not leadership, it is lawlessness. The applause surged again, this time thunderous, spilling from the benches to the rafters. The courtroom transformed into a battlefield where truth had drawn blood. The judge slammed his gavel again, not to silence the crowd but to punctuate the moment. He looked at Jasmine, then at Trump's team, and his voice cut through with finality. This court will not allow cruelty to masquerade as authority. The chamber held its breath, the nation leaning closer through the lens of live television. And as Jasmine sat back down, her words still reverberating like an aftershock, one truth rang louder than all the arguments combined. In that moment, morality had put tyranny on trial. The shockwaves from the courtroom did not stop at America's borders, they tore across the globe. Within hours, a panel of UN human rights experts released a blistering statement, their words cutting with surgical precision. The forced removal of children in the dead of night, without due process, constitutes a violation of the most basic principles of human dignity. The condemnation was carried live across international newswires, ricocheting into every capital, a scarlet mark on America's reputation. The world had seen the videos of buses idling on runways, of children clutching stuffed animals as they were herded like cargo. Now the question was no longer only about immigration policy, it was about whether the United States had abandoned its own humanity. In Europe, newspapers blared headlines that landed like indictments. Le Monde called it America versus its own conscience. The Guardian labeled the events a humanitarian disgrace in a land that once called itself a beacon of freedom. German broadcasters aired Jasmine's fiery clash with Trump alongside archival footage of civil rights marches, drawing a direct line between past struggles and the present shame. Even in nations long allied with Washington, anchors shook their heads, asking aloud how a country that preached liberty could justify dragging children onto planes in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, in Guatemala City, officials squirmed under the sudden spotlight. Reporters swarmed ministries, demanding answers. Had the government signed secret agreements? Were they complicit in receiving hundreds of children torn from their lives? Statements stammered from podiums, evasive and contradictory, but the unease was palpable. On the streets, Guatemalan families lit candles for children they feared would soon arrive as orphans of policy, not of fate. The shame of complicity now threatened to ignite unrest at home. Against this backdrop, Jasmine stepped before the world press in Washington, flanked by flags not just of her country, but of every principle it claimed to represent. The room bristled with cameras, the air charged with anticipation. Her voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the storm. Children deserve more than politics. The words rang out, translated in real time into dozens of languages, each echo carrying the weight of truth too raw to ignore. She did not speak like a politician, she spoke like a witness, a defender, a voice that refused to let the world look away. The reporters erupted with questions, the flashes of cameras turning the room into a blinding tempest. Yet Jasmine's final words held, heavier than any headline. If America cannot defend its own conscience, then the world must ask what conscience does it have left. The chamber lights dimmed as Jasmine rose once more, her voice carrying the weight of not just a hearing but of history itself. She did not read from notes, she spoke from a wound carved deep into the nation's conscience. This isn't about borders, she declared, her tone reverberating off the marble walls. This is about who we are as a people. Her words struck harder than any gavel, a truth laid bare before allies and adversaries alike. The room stilled, waiting for her to continue, sensing that what followed would not be politics, it would be judgment. She called it by its name: systemic racism, weaponized through immigration, cloaked in laws designed not to protect but to exclude. Her voice trembled, not with fear but with fury contained too long. When a government can erase the hearings of children, when it can call 7-year-olds criminals, when it can fly orphans into the night like contraband, we are not enforcing laws, we are enforcing cruelty. Gasps rippled, cameras zoomed closer, and every syllable landed like a blow to the gut of a nation forced to look in the mirror. Then the montage began. Screens lit up across the chamber and across television sets nationwide. An immigrant mother weeping, as she described being separated from her daughter for 137 days. A decorated veteran of two wars, voice breaking as he said, "I fought for this flag, but I did not fight for it to be used against children." A pastor in Detroit, arms around his congregation, declaring, "Compassion is not weakness, it is the strength that built this nation." The images played one after another, the stories relentless, undeniable, and spinnable. By the end, there was not a soul watching who had not been moved or enraged. Jasmine's voice returned over the final image, a child's hand pressed against a bus window, eyes wide, searching. "We are not judged by how we treat the powerful," she said, her tone sharp as broken glass. "We are judged by how we treat the powerless. And right now, America is failing its test." The chamber erupted again, some clapping, others shouting, the tension a live wire sparking across every inch of the room. But Jasmine stood firm, her face lit by conviction, her figure towering beyond politics, beyond party. She looked straight into the cameras, past every senator, past every protester, past every cynic waiting for her to falter, and asked the question that could not be ignored. If a nation forgets its soul, can it still call itself free? The courtroom trembled as the judge raised his gavel one final time, his voice carrying the weight of history itself. "This court hereby extends protection for all Guatemalan children currently in U.S. custody. No removals." Effective immediately, the words detonated through the chamber like a cannon blast. For a heartbeat, the silence was total. Then came the eruption. Thunderous applause thundered from the gallery. Reporters leapt to their feet. Immigrant mothers sobbed into their hands as if chains had just been shattered before their eyes. Trump's face burned crimson, jaw locked tight, eyes darting toward the exits. He stood abruptly, shoulders hunched, but there was no swagger left in his gait. The cameras followed his every step as he stormed out, red-faced and humiliated, his allies trailing behind like shadows desperate to escape the spotlight of disgrace. For once, his departure drew no cheers from his supporters, only the sound of America watching a man undone by his own cruelty. And there, in the center of the storm, stood Jasmine Crockett. She rose not as a politician, but as a guardian, her figure unyielding against the blaze of flashbulbs. A child from the gallery, barely tall enough to see over the railing, slipped through the crowd and reached for her hand. Jasmine took it without hesitation, fingers entwining with his, the gesture silent but louder than any speech. Cameras froze the image in time, the congresswoman holding a child's hand in victory, defiance written across her face, compassion etched in her eyes. The nation inhaled as one, knowing this was not just a verdict, but a reckoning. And Jasmine, standing tall with a child's hand in hers, embodied the truth carved into that moment forever. Power had lost, but humanity had won. The verdict spread across America, like a lightning strike splitting the sky. In some towns, church bells rang in solidarity, crowds gathered in public squares, and Jasmine's words were played on giant outdoor screens: "We will not let cruelty define our nation." In others, fury-bold Trump loyalists stormed rallies with banners screaming betrayal, conservative talk shows declared the ruling an attack on sovereignty, and social media erupted into a digital battlefield where hashtags clashed like swords. The divide of the nation was no longer abstract, it was carved into every street corner, every dinner table, every channel. Yet Jasmine's woes, carried through every outlet, began to transcend the nose. Clips of her confrontation with Trump were projected on buildings in New York, replayed in classrooms, quoted from pulpits. Students painted her words onto protest signs. Veterans mailed her letters thanking her for restoring the honor of a flag that had felt stained. From Los Angeles to Chicago, the message surged: cruelty would not be the cornerstone of America's future. The resistance had found its rallying cry, and Jasmine was its vessel. At night, the country glowed with candlelight. Outside detention centers, families and allies stood shoulder to shoulder, their flames flickering against the razor wire. They sang softly, prayers mixed with chants, faces illuminated by the fragile but defiant light. In Washington, Jasmine passed by one such vigil, her silhouette framed by hundreds of candles burning like stars pulled down to earth. The crowd parted, and a child pressed a candle into her hand. She held it high, the flame trembling but unbroken, a symbol the cameras seized and broadcast to millions. And in that searing image, one woman, one flame. Against the machinery of cruelty, the nation was forced to ask itself, is this the moment America chooses compassion, or the moment it loses its soul? The camera zoomed in tight, every light dimmed until the chamber itself seemed to vanish, leaving only Jasmine Crockett in the frame. Her eyes burned with exhaustion and fury, but her voice cut through like a blade honed on stone. Only the heartless hurt innocent children, only the soulless defend cruelty. America must choose who we are, Each sentence landed like a hammer against the nation's conscience, echoing through television sets, phones, and radios across every state. For a moment, even the air felt suspended, as though the world itself was waiting for an answer. The image shifted, quick cuts, cinematic and raw, the flag billowing under a bruised sky. Children once trembling now laughing, their hands clutching toes instead of bus rails. Crowds filling streets coast to coast, their chants rising like thunder against the silence of injustice. In New York, candlelight flooded the pavement outside detention centers. In Chicago, mothers carried photos of their children high above their heads like shields. In Los Angeles, veterans saluted protesters, their medals gleaming under street lamps. These images weren't background, they were proof that Jasmine's words had become more than a speech, they had become a movement. Back on screen, Jasmine leaned closer to the lens, her voice lowering into something more dangerous, more intimate. It wasn't a statement anymore, it was a challenge. If your freedom and your humanity were on trial today, would you stay silent, or would you fight back? The pause that followed was seismic, daring the audience not just to listen but to decide. The final shot lingered on her face, unflinching, then dissolved into the roar of the crowd outside, chants shaking the very ground. The story did not end with her words, it began with the question she left burning in every heart. What side of history will you choose? The story reminds us that true strength is not measured by power or authority, but by the courage to protect the most vulnerable when it costs us the most. Jasmine's fight against cruelty shows that silence in the face of injustice is never neutral, it is complicity. In our own lives, whether at work, in our communities, or within our families, we are constantly faced with moments to either look away or speak up. Change begins when ordinary people choose compassion over fear. So if you witnessed cruelty today, would you have the courage to stand against it or let it pass in silence? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.